Welcome to the Pop Podcast, where faith meets real life, and we sit down at the table and have conversations about our struggles, but about our victories as well. And it's all in Jesus Christ. We keep it Christ-centered here. We keep it very real. And as it said, we don't sugarcoat it. So welcome with us. Today is a very special day. It's a very we're gonna change things up a little bit. We're gonna literally turn the tables, as it were, and we're going to have a very special guest. I'm very honored and privileged to be here. And today he needs no introduction. We have Brother Chaz Jones with us.
I appreciate you, bro.
Awesome, bro. I'm excited for this.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, well, yeah. I mean, this is kind of your thing, but hey, we're gonna we're gonna turn the tables literally today.
Hey, flipping tables, bro, is what we're doing today.
Flipping, fly, man. I'm gonna get out of the way. But so very honored. Chaz has a tremendous ministry here at POP. We're so blessed, so thankful to have him here. He's a man of God. He's a father. He's a leader. He's a husband. Chaz has a very, very powerful ministry here at this church. He does a lot. I've had the privilege of knowing him for what was it, 3 years now?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, we started rocking as soon as we got here.
That's right. Yeah, and it feels like we've known each other longer. We're just brothers, and I think that's the partnership in the gospel.
Absolutely.
Of us being able to just connect, do things for the kingdom, advance His kingdom.
Yeah.
And Chaz he's on fire for God, but there was a time in his life where things may have not been that way.
Yeah.
And he has a powerful testimony, and he's very big in his ministry on sharing his testimony. And so today we really felt that we wanted to have that conversation.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk to Chaz, talk about the good things that God has done in his life, the things that God has taken him from, the things that God has put him to, the things that God is taking him to. And so with that being said, I know there's a long intro, but I really wanted to just take the time to just kind of explain where we're going with this today.
Yeah.
I believe God is going to speak through you today. I believe that this is going to be a powerful testimony, and I'm excited. I'm excited to hear what God has done in your life. And so with that being said, brother, let's just get into it. Let's talk about. I want you to feel the liberty to start where you want to start.
Yeah.
Take us from the beginning of where you're from, where God has brought you through, where things have started for you, where things maybe had went wrong, and then some of the victories, some of the struggles that you've had.
Yeah.
And I just want you to take the liberty and start wherever you feel. Take us to the beginning, if you would.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was thinking.
All right.
Too. Let's go back to the beginning rather. And it really does have to go back to the beginning, because when you feel God, when you know that you're called,
yes,
that can be a tough battle at times, because anybody called, we're all called. It doesn't matter whether you're on here on this podcast. It doesn't matter whether you're preaching from a pulpit, whether you're a minstrel at church, whether you're still running from your purpose with God. We're all called. Jesus tells us to go into the world and make disciples.
Yes.
That is a basic mandate for anyone who calls themselves a Christian. And I think, in today's society, we all fall short daily. Bible says we fall short daily. But there's a lot of people in today's society that call themselves Christians that don't necessarily walk with Christ. And that's not necessarily saying denomination, that's not saying culture, that's not saying where you grew up, church, anything like that. That's just saying there's a lot of people that say, yeah, I'm a Christian, I believe in Jesus.
Right.
Well, the devil believes in Jesus.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? But when you're called,
yes,
there's nobody on this planet that is called to something that they are not going to go through struggles. And I believe from the very beginning, the enemy works very specifically. He ain't stupid.
No.
And the Bible tells us that God had a plan set before us before we were even in our mother's womb. So it's the devil's responsibility and his design to counter that.
Yes.
With everything that comes through with God, there is a counter assignment that comes in after that. So because we are called, and speaking to my testimony, because I knew I was called, the attacks on my life came very early on. Going back to the beginning, I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago. You know, I'm a Chicagoland native. I got a love-hate relationship with my city, which is why we moved to Arizona. But there's a lot of great people there.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's a lot of great people. It's a great city, great culture, great food.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know, it's a lot of great things. Oh, we can talk about all day about the food. But it's a lot. There's a lot of great things. Even in the kingdom, there's a lot of great things that have come out of Chicago. A lot of great preachers, a lot of great prophets, a lot of great minstrels, a lot of great apostles, pastors that have come out of Chicago. I was very fortunate to be in one house, in one church, you know, my entire life, and we'll get into that. But that's where I grew up. You know, I did grow up with both parents in the house, so to speak. And, you know, I do want to, even before getting into that, because I think the world right now needs transparency.
Right.
And I have made a commitment to God to share my life.
Right.
Within reason. You know, there's still things, and I think that's wisdom.
Of course, yeah.
There's still things, absolutely. You know, Bible says to guard your heart. You know, there's things that I've gone through that I may not be ready to share with people. There's things that I'm going through that I'm not ready to share with people. And I think we're all at that stage of life where we can look back at our life and say, you know, God delivered me from this. I'll share this with the world and say, you know, I'm still going through this right now. I haven't come out of it, and I'm going to wait to share that. There's nothing wrong with waiting. No. You know, Pastor did that, and he did that very, very healthy and very well when he talked about his cancer, and he talked about his heart surgery that he had to have. You know, being, you know, his son-in-law, he kept things very close. You know, before even some of his, you know, ministerial staff, he told his ministers, but he didn't necessarily tell the congregation, and then it came out later. So there's nothing wrong with timing. Thank you, bro. Thank you.
Timing is everything.
100% timing is everything. But I've reached a point in my life where I can look back at everything in my life, and I can connect the dots on how God had his hand on my life the entire time.
Isn't that amazing?
It's truly amazing.
It's incredible when you look back and you see at the time you didn't know what was going on. You couldn't have put it together back then. But then you look back now and you're like, God, you had it all. You had 100%. It all. You had it all in your hand. You had a reason for what you were doing.
Absolutely.
It was all in your timing. It was all in your will. I wanted to ask you something, because you're flowing right now, and I'm really intrigued here.
Yeah. Dude.
But you said
take your time.
Take
bro.
my time. Oh, I like
timing,
the spot,
bro.
I like the spot.
It suits you well, my guy.
It feels good. It feels good.
Yeah.
I don't do as good as you do.
Negative, bro.
But I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try.
Hey, do your thing, bro.
Do my thing. All right. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there today.
Absolutely.
You mentioned something really, really interesting to me. You said the way you talked about calling on your life, and I 100% unequivocally believe God has an amazing calling on your life, Chaz.
Thank you.
I think it's like I said before we just got into this podcast, that you've been a blessing to our church family, to my family personally. You are such a blessing to us, and it's because you do put God first, and it's because you are stepping into the calling that God has for you. And I know it wasn't easy, and we're going to talk about that today.
Absolutely.
It wasn't overnight. It wasn't just all, you know, rain. What do they call it? Sunshine and rainbows. And it was not. I know that. But you have I could see the humble attitude that you have, and I know that comes from a lot of years of probably things that you had to go through. But you mentioned calling, and you kind of mentioned the beginning, and what I want to do is just ask and just get into that. When did you said you were called early on? When did you hear that calling? When did you feel that calling? Because I think there's a lot of people out there that feel maybe they're called, or
Yeah.
they know that they think they might have a calling from God, but they don't know.
Yeah.
And that's a big subject in the Bible. I mean, there's many
Yeah.
people that were called that didn't even step into it,
Yeah.
and they had to find out later. Or there's so many examples of God calling people.
Yeah.
And I believe we all have a calling. Like you said, Jesus tells us to go
Yeah.
out into the world and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is Jesus' name.
Absolutely.
And
Amen.
you know, we're supposed to reach the world for Christ, and through our testimony as well.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, and I want you to kind of get into that a little bit, on the calling that you had, you heard from God.
Yeah.
When that was, and maybe you can kind of go through the timeline from, maybe, you know, did you grow up in church? Were you not, you know, raised in church? I want you to kind of share all that perspective.
Yeah.
And I want you to get into the calling specifically of, when you were called. Have you ever walked away from the calling? Have you ever felt a little bit of doubt in that calling?
Yeah.
When did you realize? And I want you to just get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To answer your question directly, bro, I want to say late childhood, early teenage years
Okay.
is when I really recognized, like, okay, there's something's going on. You know, I do believe that God has something for me. I didn't know what it was, you know, but I had a lot of people in my life that were speaking into my life. I did grow up in church. So,
Okay.
So to answer that question directly, yes, about that time. To answer the second question, because it lines up, I did step away from my calling in my teenage years and then in my early 20s. And yes, I did come back. Obviously, did come back.
Right.
About my mid 20s, and that's a whole. We're gonna get
We'll
into
get into
that.
that.
Oh, that's the
Yeah.
thick of it right there. But let's go back to the beginning. So yes, I was raised in church my entire life. So I want to place honor on both my mother and my father. I've talked about them both here on this podcast, and again, I have made a decision with God in my prayer time to preach my life. And there's good things, there's great things, there's bad things, there's ugly things
Right.
about my life, you know, and I'm not speaking negatively to anybody within
Sure.
my life. Again, placing honor on everybody who has helped me get to this point, because they were the building blocks of my life. It was my dad, who I carry his name, you know, who is called as a prophet, you know, and I have taken on that gift, you know, and he at times in his life was bold for Christ. He was in ministry. He was, you know, head of the ushers. He was in security. He was dedicated, and he was passionate about it, you know. My mother, who shares a prophetic gifting as well, who now is an ordained prophet at the church that I grew up in, she was very key in developing my gifts as a child, you know, prophetically, and discernment and dreams and interpretation of dreams. And she was very instrumental in speaking into my life very early on, and pushing me forward. But going back to the beginning, my parents conceived me out of wedlock. Okay. So again, still placing honor, but this is just, we don't sugarcoat it here. This is just a real life. You know what I'm saying? And I want to pause here and go back to the point that I was making, is the world needs transparency right now.
Absolutely.
I am very passionate about where it says in Revelation, where we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. We are all meant to be overcomers in our lives. We are not meant, I'm going to get passionate here real quick, bro, but I'm not sugarcoating it, because I am so sick and tired of the passive-aggressive Christian. I am so sick and tired of the passive-aggressive churches. I am so sick and tired of the people that say, I'm going to just pray about it. But okay, go pray about it, but what are you doing about it? Because faith without works is dead. There's people out here that are hurting and dying. There's people out here that are into addictions. There's people out here that are suffering because the church, not all churches, definitely not pop, definitely not our pastor, but there are churches out there collectively as a whole that refuse to step up and talk about the real issues of the world. And yes, we're called to uplift people and encourage people, but we're also meant to reach into the mud and save people. And I do believe that part of my calling is reaching into the mud and saving people, opening up as Jesus opened up to Thomas and saying, look, I got wounds too. I got scars too. I wasn't perfect. You see me on a podcast, you see me on a platform, but you didn't see me depressed. You didn't see me addicted. You didn't see me when I was struggling with suicide. You didn't see those moments, but now that I've overcome those moments, it's time for me to show those moments and give glory to God, because he was the one who stuck his hand into my mud and pulled me out of the mud. So I was,
Powerful, brother.
I appreciate it, bro. There was, I feel very passionate about that. Christians are not meant to be, we are meant to be humble. I do my best to be humble in everything that I do, but we are not meant to just be pushovers. We are not meant just to sit there. Thank you, bro. We are not meant to just sit there and just passively go about life. We are called. Yes. We are called by the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We are called by the one who created us. He designed us. He put us together. Absolutely. There is a plan for us that we are meant to call. That goes into everything. That goes into your walk with Christ. That goes into how you treat your family. That goes into how you show up at work. That goes into your physical, your mental. Everything encompasses your calling that God has designed you for. So my calling goes back to the beginning again, like I said, where my parents conceived me out of wedlock. They were already engaged, but they conceived me out of wedlock. And my former pastor who I was under, the church I grew up at, he married my parents when I was still in my mama's womb. Okay, so I've been in church literally my whole life. I was born in church. Is what we do, you know.
Right here, church kids, man.
Exactly,
right.
bro. And there's I want to get rid of the stigma that church kids either run away from church or they're sold out for Christ their entire life. No, we have a process that we have to go through too. Everybody has a process. Part of your testimony may be that you grew up in church. Part of your testimony may be that you're the first one who ever showed up in church, and you go back to your family and save your whole family. You know, but I was conceived again, and my pastor married my parents while I was still in my mother's womb. We lived, and attacks for me started very early on.
Okay.
And I'm talking about like straight out the womb. So at less than a year old, I'm vocal. One of my calling is to speak.
Yes.
My calling is to preach. My calling is public speaking. My calling is this right here. You know, a voice. Exactly. Right. I know that I'm meant to be a voice for this generation. I know that I'm meant to be and that's not prideful at all.
No.
I think false humility is such a detriment to Christians because you sit there and we get in this false humility and no, that's not me. No, that's not me. No, that is you. Be who God called you. Exactly. You step on the piano and you play that piano beautifully. That's who God called you to be. That's what you do, bro. And you do it for the kingdom. You don't sit there and say, oh, you don't.
That's a good point.
You don't dance around it. That's who you are, you know. And
our identity is in Christ.
Thank you, bro. Thank you, 100%. You can still be humble about it. You can be
thankful for it,
and thankful for it. Absolutely. I feel I'm almost humble to the point where I feel almost undeserving to be a voice for God because I know the things that have come out of my mouth. You know, I'm like, God, you can still use this mouth to proclaim your name. You can still use this person to proclaim your name. Like, all right, God, I'm trusting you on this one because I know me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But attacks started very early on when I was, again, I grew up in Chicago, or Chicagoland, and winters in Chicago are brutal. And I had caught pneumonia less than 1 year old.
Oh, wow.
And that's deadly.
That is deadly.
That's deadly for a baby. The key that saved my life, and this is how I know attacks started very early on, is because when I caught pneumonia, my tongue started to roll in the back of my mouth because of the fever and the sickness and what I was going through. And my mom said that she had to stick a pencil in my mouth to prevent my tongue from rolling into my throat, because it would have killed me and suffocated me if she didn't stop my tongue from going back there. And she kept trying to grab it, you know, with her hand, but obviously you have saliva and things like that. So she said she had to stick a pencil in there, and my tongue rolled on the pencil and prevented my tongue from rolling. So the very thing that God has designed me to use was the very thing that the devil was trying to get at me. When I was a toddler, we lived in a town called Sauk Village, which is kind of very far suburbs of Chicago, but kind of a babyhood, of Chicago. Even now, it's horrible, to live there.
Right.
And Sauk Village is one that is filled with a lot of witchcraft. I think that's another thing that I'm called to speak against is Jezebel, Ahab, the spirit of witchcraft, and how that operates in people's lives, because that was such a strong attack against me. Later on in my life, I found out that my family, because my dad is German, Spanish, amongst a couple other things, but he's white essentially, and my mother is Mexican and Indian. And when you go back into the depths of the Mexican heritage and the Indian heritage, there's a lot of witchcraft that goes along with their human sacrifice and bestiality, spells, incantations, different things like that. So that I found out later in life that came through my bloodline, and that attacks me, and that's a war that I still have to recognize that, okay, this thing is still trying to take its foothold, in my life, and witchcraft shows up in many different ways, So and being very strategic and making sure that I pray and war against that, so that it doesn't affect my family now, pass on to my kids, because generational curses are a real thing. We've talked about it on this podcast. So in the Sauk Village, there is a lot of witchcraft that happens. There's a lot of wetlands and hidden places that people can go and do a lot of different things. Well, in the house that we lived in specifically, I was only probably 1 or 2 years old, I experienced attacks there that I still remember to this day. And I'm 36 now. And how I knew that they were real is because in my teens, I kept having dreams about this room, and I kept having dreams about these things that were happening to me, and I brought them up to my mom because they were reoccurring dreams. And when I described the room to her and how it was a baby's room, and how the crib was set up, and where the window was at, and where the toy chest was at, and the closet and the rocking chair, and I explained every single shelf where it was at, hung up on the wall, and she goes, "How do you remember that? Because that was your room when you were 2 years old." And I said, "That's just what I remember." So in that house, when my parents moved in, they weren't allowed to go into the basement. They were renting the house at the time, and come to find out that the people who were living there before us, they were doing satanic rituals in the basement. The basement door had a bolt lock on it. You couldn't go down there. Well, my mom ended up having to go down there one time with the landlord to look at something, and what she saw just scared her to death, because every single wall, the ceiling, the floor, everything was painted black, and there was a red pentagram that was painted on the floor. Well, when she found that out, they started asking some of the neighbors. Well, come to find out, some of the neighbors who had been in the neighborhood for a few years would say that, the people who lived there before you, they actually got kicked out because the landlord saw what they were doing, and apparently there were several animals, like pets, within the neighborhood that were coming up missing. And late at night, they would hear them sacrificing the animals. They would hear the screams and the yelps of the cats and the dogs, and they would hear all these things that were going on in this basement. They would hear the loud noises, and then they would hear everything go silent, and everybody knew something was happening in that basement. So in that very house that I lived in, there were spells and there was witchcraft happening in full effect, bro.
Wow.
In 100% full effect.
So a very dark environment that you were kind of being raised in because of where you were at, and just a lot of that darkness, the demonic things.
It was evil.
It's evil.
Wow. It was 100% evil, and my parents didn't know it,
right?
Until the landlord just said, "You're just not allowed to go down there."
Yeah.
But some of the attacks that happened is very early on. I would be tormented at night as a baby, and I used to have a lot of clown dolls. And like baby toys all up on the shelves and different things like that, just decorations for a baby, normal decorations. But I specifically remember those decorations waking me up in the middle of the night, laughing at me and coming to life.
Wow.
And I'm not talking about like you think you hear something. I specifically remember looking at these shelves, looking at these dolls, and their faces moving and smiling, and hearing the evil laughs behind them. I remember hearing all of that. I remember seeing the shadows coming out of the closet. I remember seeing the shadows in the corner of the room and just being tormented. And my mom would tell me that she would wake up in the middle of the night, her and my dad, to me just screaming and crying hysterically and pointing to these dolls like, it's alive, no, 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 it's alive, it's alive. And so that was one of the things that continuously happened to me until we moved out of that house. Another thing that happened in that house, my mom told me the story where I was in a walker in the kitchen as she was preparing dinner one day, and I was stacking up cans of food, just normal baby stuff,
Right.
And she said she turned to look, and it was almost as if something grabbed the back of my head, pulled me back, and slammed my face into those cans, and it busted my head open as how hard it slammed it. Another one that happened was that my aunt had got me a rocking chair from Mexico. She brought it back as a present, and this was kind of the final straw for my parents. Were like, all right, we need to get out of this house
Right.
because something
Yeah.
is happening. Where she was walking from the bedroom to the kitchen late at night, and then she walked back from the kitchen to the bedroom, and the rocking chair, my rocking chair that I would play on, was sitting in the corner, and she specifically remembered the eyes of the rocking chair following her as she walked through the living room. So I was exposed as in such an innocent age to just pure evil.
Yeah.
And had no idea how to come against it. My parents, even very young in their life, because they were in their mid to early 20s when they had me, and they were very early on in their walk with Christ. They didn't know how to handle it. They just knew they were both raised in church.
Right.
But when you're dealing with that level
Yeah.
of evil, you got to know how to come against it.
Yes.
And you do speak the name of Jesus over it. But if you are not mature enough as a Christian, and you're not mature enough in Christ to know that I'm going to speak the name of Jesus over this, it grips you.
Yeah.
That fear grips you. So that's another thing that I grew up with very heavily is fear.
Yeah, that's a very dark picture of early on, being already where dark forces are already attacking your family, attacking you guys. You mentioned about that your family finally decided, hey, let's leave this place.
Yeah.
Moving on to from that environment, kind of, if you would, to kind of take us where you guys went, kind of what church looked like growing up for you.
Yeah.
Still kind of sticking to the calling that you had on your life. That was a powerful testimony you gave about how even early on your tongue was, you had something going on, and I believe that. I think that you're used mightily to speak the word of God and reach others, and so kind of from there, where did you go? What did it look like growing up as far as maybe a little bit more of an older kid?
Yeah.
Where did you go from there?
Yeah. So my dad was my dad would bounce around from jobs, a lot.
Okay.
He was a truck driver, so finding a job wasn't hard, at all.
Right.
He was a construction worker at first, and then he went into trucking after he hurt his shoulder in construction. He just physically couldn't do the job anymore. It's a tough job,
Right. Yeah.
So as a kid, we would bounce back and forth between either houses or my grandma's house, both my grandmas on both sides, and the attacks still followed. I remember, you ever heard of sleep paralysis?
Yes, I have.
Where you feel that, to those who don't know, sleep paralysis is when you're laying there and you wake up half asleep, but you feel something on top of you. And I remember vividly having a dream, going into those kid years that you were talking about, having a dream where something was attacking me. There was a war that was going on in the backyard of my grandma's house that we were living at, and my dad had to go fight this war. My mom didn't want him to go fight the war. This was all happening in my dream, and he left, and as I followed him out the door, I turned to look, and behind the washer and dryer there was this demon, and the only thing that I saw was from the eyes up, and it was extremely scary, and it freaked me out in the dream. But as I came to out of the dream, I felt something, a demon on my chest and grabbing my throat. and I attempted to scream and yell for my mom, and I specifically remember that I couldn't speak at all, and I almost had to like fight and wiggle this thing off of me to be able to call out for my mom. I'm only like 6-7 years old at the time.
Wow.
I'm still a kid. So that childhood was bouncing back and forth. Now, church was always consistent.
Okay.
There was always, we went to church on Sundays. We went to church on Wednesdays or Thursdays. They changed the services back then. But it was always Sunday service, midweek service. There was even times where we went to Sunday evening service.
I remember those days.
Kids today don't know about
that. That Sunday morning, you take a nap.
Come on.
Then you get maybe some lunch,
that's
and then you
still might be in the same clothes.
Yeah, you probably are going to be. Yeah, you're going to wear the same clothes all day long.
Exactly.
And then you're going to get to church on Sunday night.
Exactly.
And you're going to be there till what, about 10 p.m.?
About 10 p.m., bro. But some of my favorite memories as a kid in church is falling asleep on the pews.
Yeah, you know what? That is, I do have those memories myself. I'm like you in that respect as far as growing up in church, parents being ministry. And I remember being dragged there was choir practice during the week. Yep. There was being there for meetings or church things going on.
Yeah.
And then the Sunday morning, Sunday night prayer. We used to have prayer every Friday night, without fail. Yep. And we'd always go. And I remember just being tired, being in the pews, those old wooden pews. Yeah. Back in this is like in the 90s, man. So
it's good old church.
The good old church days, man. These kids nowadays, they don't know nothing about that. But
we got to bring it back.
We got to bring it back. Yeah. No,
that's real talk. But I don't know about Sunday evening services.
Yeah. I know. I'm a little used to just the morning service now. I kind of lost that conditioning.
Yeah.
But no, it is. I do remember that dynamic early on. That was kind of a big thing.
Yeah.
So you talked about just some of the dark things that happened early on.
Yeah.
It sounds like there was a pretty dark environment from that culture, that environment that you were in. Growing up in church. Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about your family and you guys being Christians, dealing with that darkness.
Yeah.
You guys, you said you made it was a big thing to be at church.
Yeah.
Consistency. There was a lot of consistency there, it sounds like.
There was.
Okay.
The dynamic that happened though is there was inconsistency of the church, and it was no fault of my pastor at the time or the leadership. Okay. So let me paint that picture. So what happened was the church, when I was still around that 7-8 year old range, is the church that I was growing up in, the building burnt down. There was an electrical fire and it burnt it down. And I remember getting the call. It was like a Saturday night where the phone rang and my dad answered the phone. I'm sitting on the couch watching TV and he's freaking out, and my mom's sitting up at this point, and she's like, "What happened?" And he's like, "The church is on fire and it's burning down. I gotta go." And he bolts it out because again, he was very involved in he helped physically build the church because he was again a carpenter, and he took those skills and put them towards the ministry. He helped build the school that was there. He helped build some of the basements and the building and the structure. He was literally helping physically build the church.
Wow.
So he bolted to the church. Sure enough, the church had burnt down, and it burnt down to the ground. So the inconsistency, not of the church, but of the place that we were at, was we bounced from building to building. I remember we rented out a college, community college that was in the area. Then we rented out a high school for several years. And then finally around my, I want to say coming into my teenage years is when they built and established a building, and then that's where I grew up for the rest of my, kid and adolescent life. And then into adulthood, the church is still there now. But as far as family life goes, and even in being in church consistently, we still dealt with stuff at home.
Yeah.
My dad was I place honor on my dad because me and him have since reconciled, and we have a great relationship.
That's
now.
awesome.
We didn't talk for 18 years after him and my mom got divorced, but we have since reconciled, and we can even laugh about the stuff that happened back in the day now.
Yeah, praise God.
And me and him talk, 2-3 times a week. It's awesome.
That's awesome, bro. I mean, and I'm sure you'll talk a little bit more about it, but just
absolutely.
The fact of reuniting families, that's just what the power of God does.
100%, bro.
He can take something that's broken and restore it. There's a lot of broken families out there.
Yeah.
I'm blessed to have a close family, And even in some of my extended family, there's people that I wasn't really around growing up, but now I've seen God bring some of my family to the Lord. I mean, to the church, and they found God.
That's awesome.
and growing up, they weren't walking with God.
Yeah.
And just through our lifestyle, just our example, just being consistent, always praying for them, always being there, that God was able to restore that relationship, and now we're very close. So
100%.
and that I've seen that time and time again, and so that's a beautiful thing. But yeah, let's talk about a little bit about just your experience growing up in the church. And you get into that a little bit.
Experience in the church was very good.
Okay.
I will say that the church that I went to, the leadership was good. The pastor was good. The people around me, the people who went to church, I was surrounded by a lot of very good people growing up in church. A lot of people that spoke into my life very well. A lot of people that recognized calls and gifts on my life very early on and helped pull me into some of those. But even in church was very difficult for me growing up, and there was a reason for it. So I have always, and I think this comes with leadership, I think any leader is going to feel some sort of separation from the crowd, so to speak. So growing up, I never really fit in anywhere. I was always, everybody knew who I was, and I had my friends, but I was always kind of that oddball out, so to speak, and I was always kind of walking by myself, so to speak. And that happened in church too. At home, it was very violent at my home. Again, my dad was very young. He was not the man who he is today, thank God. And he was very physically, emotionally, and mentally, abusive. My mom, my mom, as great as she was, there was some psychological abuse that came from her, so I was battling who I was supposed to be, both at home and in the church, because I'm hearing all of these things that church, there's a calling on your life. You're meant to do great things. Chaz, you're a leader, and you're this and you're that. And then I'm looking at myself in the mirror. I'm like, but I'm getting beaten at home. I'm getting yelled at home. I have no friends at church. Nobody wants to be around me. Like, where is this call supposed to be coming from? Because as a child, when you're not accepted, and even as a teen, when you're not accepted, that hurts.
That's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
Rejection is such a powerful thing to people. It really does some
100%, bro.
Damage.
100%. And that is one of the things that I battled with a lot in my life, was rejection and wanting to be accepted by people. And I'm being just very transparent right now, because again, I agree with God that I'm going to preach my life, so people can have their opinions. I don't care, anymore. It's all about giving glory to God, because He's since delivered me from so many things. Amen. And I know there's people out there who are still dealing with a lot of those things. But rejection was, I was rejected from my dad. I remember getting in an argument with my dad one time and telling him, why do you hate me so much? I didn't do nothing to you. Like, I was just born, and the worst thing that he could have done was nothing. He sat there and he just did nothing. And I asked him about it many years later. I asked him about it last year. I'm like, dude, why didn't you say anything? Like, that was such a crucial moment for me in my life.
You need to hear something.
And I needed to hear something. And I remember my mom crying at him, and she's like, Chuck, why don't you say something to your son right now? He's begging for your acceptance. He's begging for your affirmation. He's begging you to just acknowledge where he's coming from, and you're not saying anything. Say something. And he just sat there and watched TV. And I asked him about it a couple years later, and what I had to come to terms with as an adult. But the revelation that God gave me, because now I'm married and have kids and now have one on the way, is he said, Chaz, I don't even remember that. And I'm like, dude, are you serious right now?
I do.
Yeah, because I remember that very vividly. And he was like, he says, I'm sorry, I don't remember that. So I wasn't angry at him because I'm more mature now, but the revelation that God gave me is you don't understand the power of being present for your family, for yourself, for your kids.
Yeah.
You have to be present in the moments that matter most. My wife, very early on in my marriage, I'll be honest with you, I was not the greatest husband.
Yeah.
I had a lot of growing up that I had to do very quickly, and she always would tell me, Chaz, you need to show up in the moments that matter most, because those are those key life-changing moments. And for my dad, it was just a Tuesday, but for me, it was a life-changing moment that pushed me into seeking acceptance from other places, and I battled that again in church. I battled that in church. I was always sitting by myself. I was always sitting, alone. I would come in and people would give me this look of disgust. And I'm like, what did I do to you? I'm just here. Like my parents drug me to church tonight too. Like,
but you guys.
That's what I'm saying. But that caused me to seek validation and acceptance in things that I shouldn't have been involved in. It pushed me into addictions. It pushed me into seeking, affirmation and almost kind of man-pleasing, because you're like, I just want something. It pushed me into the gang. It pushed me into all of these things.
That right there, I just want to take a moment and stop, because you're kind of heading into something that I feel like a lot of people need to hear, is that is one of the greatest deceptions, one of the greatest weapons the enemy can use is isolation. And,
100%.
And taking you by yourself and filling you with these thoughts of rejection, needing validation from somebody else, seeking for pleasure, seeking for finding your place in life, finding your place, and I think that is where the enemy does his best work,
100%.
is where you are feeling rejected, and you talked about your father not being present in that moment. I think a lot of times what happens is when people aren't who they should be, and they're not happy with who they are, they sometimes can leave a void in their kids' life. And as fathers, we need to remember that 100%. That's important for us to do what we need to do to get that our mental health right, our heart right. We got to be right with God so that we can be present for our families and not put that in our children and in the next generation. We got to be present.
Let me pack that a different way, bro. I'm gonna say the same thing, but I want to pack it a different way because you hit something so key, and I want to say it not just for the sake of this conversation, but I want to say it to everybody here. If as a father, especially as a man, as somebody who is meant to be the leader of their home, if you don't deal with your trauma, you're gonna give it to your kids. If you don't deal with your mess, it's gonna spill over to your wife. It is so important. And I feel that there is such a call right now in this day and age where it's time for men to step up, because there are bloodlines coming behind us that need us to deal with our mess. I am in my life right now, I feel very passionate to, again, pull men out of the mud. Men, you need to deal with your stuff. You need to come to terms with either who you are or who you used to be, and you need to look at yourself in the mirror and saying, I am not the best version of myself that I am supposed to be. I am not the best version of myself that God has called me to be, and it's time to step up. And that looks like many different things for a bunch of different people, but you said 100% correct, bro. Men need to deal with their stuff. If we don't deal with our stuff, it's gonna pass to our kids, and that's biblical. And go research it.
And you will pass something to your kids.
100%.
The question is what are you gonna pass?
That's
to
so
them?
good, bro. Absolutely.
Yeah, you will. And so, I've seen that so many times with people that have gone through many struggles. A lot of it starts with a rejection. A lot 100%. Of it starts with what they were given.
Rejection and unforgiveness.
Yes, unforgiveness. Yes, that's a big one. And so I didn't mean to stop you there, but I really wanted to focus on some of the things you were saying a lot of good things and really painting a picture for us on some of those areas. And you were talking about that rejection, and then you started leading into, and I want to start getting into this, and of course this is going to be whatever you're comfortable sharing, whatever God has laid on your heart. I just want to be here to help, maybe just direct the conversation, but it's all really what God has put on your heart. You started talking about you were looking for other things, and I wanted to ask the question, was this kind of the turning point for you? I know that you've shared before in getting into the gang life, getting into different things that you weren't supposed to, kind of getting out of the church, if you will, or stepping away from God for a little while. Is this kind of the turning point? And if it was, just maybe speak on that a little bit, on what you were looking for, and then what you ended up finding.
Yeah. I will say I was looking for, I think, anything that any other kid dealing with rejection. Right. And we're talking about now, I am going into my teenage and adolescent years, where your emotions and your hormones are going crazy. It's pivotal. Yeah, absolutely, bro. 100%, bro. Between 13 and 20 for any child growing up is such a crucial age.
Very much.
And parents, be present. You know, don't let your kids get into isolation. I love what you said about isolation, because we've talked about it several times on this podcast. And our pastor has called us not to be isolated, but to be insulated, where you have brothers that you know that you can call on in a moment. I know I can call you at 11 o'clock at night, you know, and be like, bro, I'm going through something right now. Can you pray with me? And I know that you're going to be there, and vice versa. You know, it's, hey, bro, I need you to show up for me right now in this way or this way or this way. Or, bro, I just need a vent right now. Can you hear me out? That's the insulation. You know, women need women of God around them, because the devil does work in isolation. So one of the key things that happened to me in my life was that we ended up moving back to Sauk Village for a time. And that was such an instrumental, it was about 2-3 years that we moved back there. I was coming out of elementary school and going into junior high. So you're at that age, you're getting a sense of what the world is, and you're starting to taste different things. And I was in public school, so you're not around people who are necessarily Christian. You're not around people who have the same beliefs as you, that grew up the same way as you. So I was exposed to a lot, you know, very early on, as anybody would be, you know, going through what I went through, you know. And where the devil kept me is I never felt that I had an escape. So that's when I started to look. It was almost like he put me in a bubble, and that's where I started to look for things that either made me feel good or made me feel safe or made the pain go away inside of that bubble. It was that isolation that he put me in.
Well, that's what the enemy does. He 100%. He can't necessarily do something to you, but he can let you believe that that's all you have. That's the only options you have.
And I fell for that lie hard, bro.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
I really did I fell for that lie hard, because I really felt that I was alone in life, and in a lot of aspects I was alone. Right. You know, like I did have my mom there, and again, placing honor on my mom. My mom she was there for me. She was very good. I could come to my mom and talk to her about pretty much anything and everything, you know. And I know that my mom and dad loved me, you know, but they loved me in the ways that they knew how to love. And that's another thing that parents need to do. And even in people in relationship, you can't always love people the way that you think they should be loved. Sometimes if not most of the time, you got to love people the way that they need to be loved, because most of the time you need to be loved the way that you need to be loved, not the way that they want to love you. And my parents, I say this, that my parents were products of their environment that never, if hardly ever, refused to change. Somebody has to break the cycle.
Somebody's got to do it.
Somebody has to do something different, because you're just going to continue to repeat the cycle. It happens in my family. I got some great aunts and uncles and cousins. I got a lot of great family, but I see cycles in my family that I'm like, when are we going to stop with this nonsense? When are we? I've even had to apologize to my future brother-in-law, because I'm like, bro, we brought you into this toxicity, and I have to apologize as a leader of this family, because we should have been kinder to you coming in and not sitting there being a bully to you know. But somebody has to break the cycle, and in a lot of ways my parents did, and in a lot of ways more often they did not. It repeated. So a lot of that burden fell onto me. So that turning point for me was when I moved back to Sauk Village, where I ended up meeting 7th grade. I moved in there, and I finally found some friends. I'm like, man, this is awesome. I finally found friends who like me for me, who want to be around me, friends who come to my house knocking on the door, seeing if I could come outside, not just friends who just, you know, want something from me, you know? So I started to find that group of friends, but then that also exposed me to a lot of different things.
Yeah.
You know, it exposed me to smoking, and it exposed me to drinking. Even in 4th and 5th grade, I was kind of exposed to some things. In 4th grade
And
or
how old
5th
were you
grade,
when you were exposed to the smoking and drinking?
smoking and drinking, I was exposed in 7th grade. And that's when I
12,
started.
13 years old.
12, 13 years old is when I started dabbling
Wow.
into it, and because
Very young.
because my friend's mom smoked, so she's not gonna know, and she drunk. You know, everybody. You know, Friday night is the cookout. You know, and we're over, and everybody's drinking, and everybody's smoking, and 2 cigarettes getting pulled out the pack, so me and my friends could go smoke them. That goes unnoticed, you know, especially when they're drunk. You know, they're just like, "Oh man, I must have rolled through my cigarettes." Yeah, exactly. Such a pivotal age, and we'd go when they were in the house, we'd go in the shed and we smoke weed and we'd smoke cigarettes and just exposed to these things. In 5th grade, I was exposed to pornography, you know, for the first time, and I remember I went over my friend's house, and I was so excited to go over my friend's house because it was like, I got this. My mom's letting me go. I'm only, 10 years old at the time. I can go to my friend's house and I can hang out inside. And this is my friend from school, and I trust him, and we got a great relationship. And then, but his mom was very, I'll be honest with you, bro. His mom was very seductive in how she talked, because it was me, him, and our other friend that was there. And how she engaged with us was not okay. How she engaged with us was not how an adult should be engaging with a child. Like, I remember where we were all in his room playing video games, and they were playing video games, and she came into me and she started just talking to me and rubbing on my hands and rubbing on my arms, and she's like, "Here, feel this and feel that," and just being exposed.
Predatory.
It's predatory, bro. I didn't know what to do.
Right.
I'm just like, okay. And as a young boy, I'm like, okay, you get a little bit of excitement about that. You know what I'm saying? Because you're a young boy and you don't know how to handle this situation right now. But at the same time, the back thought is like, because Christian foundation was instilled into me and good foundation was instilled into me very early on, I'm like, there's something that's not right about that. No. Well, later that day, as we were playing, my friend, the mom leaves, and my friend pulls out an adult film, and back in the day we had VHS, so he pulls out an adult film out of the hiding spot in his room, and he's like, "You guys want to see something?" And I swear he turned it on, and for about 20 minutes I didn't look at the thing. I had my back to the TV. I said, my mom told me that I wasn't supposed to be looking at stuff like that, and I'm just sitting here playing with the toys. But eventually,
yep,
you turn around, it's there.
And really, just to stop on that, I just want to say there's an epidemic, especially for men our age.
Yes.
Our generation. I don't think it's just our generation. I think men have always had this. I mean, from all the way back to the beginning, men have always dealt with lust and things like that. But nowadays, I actually was just having a Bible study there's a group of guys that I've been meeting with in my gym, and they opened up about a lot of that, the pornography and the struggle. And we all came to the conclusion, and we all talked about how all, or most, if not all of us, were exposed at a very young age.
Yep.
In our, especially men our age, is that was the turning point of technology where, and men, I'm talking to you just for a moment, a lot of us were exposed to that early on, and that did something.
100%.
And it's you can see it today and how rampant it is, and how damaging it is to marriages, and how damaging it is to men. And I think when you're talking about men stepping out and being present, I mean, you don't realize the damage that can do to your brain, to your heart, to your mind, your soul.
There are 3 things, or 2 other things that have the effect on the brain the same as heroin does.
Yes.
Everybody knows what heroin is.
Right.
But how your brain works is when you're naturally exposed to something that feels good, you get grooves in your brain. There's a scientific name for it. Y'all can go look it up. I know it's there. I'm not a scientist.
Dr. Chaz over here.
I am not, but I want to know how I tick.
Yes.
And that was another turning point in my life that we'll get into a little bit, is I want to know how I tick, because when you are a spiritual and physical being, we are mind, body, and soul.
Soul, yes.
100%. When you become born again, you are accepting Jesus Christ's call for your life. You are saying, I am no longer the person who I used to be. And the the turmoil that comes into that is that you are choosing something different for your life while still in the same physical body. And your flesh is always going to be at war. When you choose to be baptized in Jesus' name and you come out of that water, you are choosing something different from your life, but you are still in the same physical body.
I like that, bro. That's good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where the torment comes in. The flesh will always be at war with the spirit. That's why Paul said, when I want to do good, I do bad. And when I want to do bad, it's that inner turmoil that I don't care what apostle, pastor, preacher you are, singer you are. It doesn't matter. If you are in this flesh until the day that you breathe your last breath and then hopefully go into glory, as I pray that we all do, you will be battling with your flesh. And lust shows up very differently for many different people. Lust can show up as sexual addictions. Lust can show up as gluttony.
It's true.
Lust can show up as many different things. Lust can show up as you just want to. Lust can show up in the gym.
It's your fleshly appetite.
And thank you, bro. Thank you for breaking that down. Yeah. It is your fleshly appetite. That's what lust is. That is the biggest thing that the enemy likes to use to pull people into that isolation and keep them captive right there. So 100%, bro.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean, again, I just wanted to point that out.
Well, let me say this. My bad, bro. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I forgot that I wasn't finishing my thought. I got on a tangent.
Let's do it.
So the grooves in your brain.
Okay.
As you heroin, pornography, and sugar.
Okay.
Processed sugar are the things in your brain that cause these grooves, and the brain spikes the same way. When scientists, not Chaz, when the scientists read the brain spikes the same way as it does with heroin, as it does with pornography, and as it does with processed sugar. The problem on why it becomes an addiction is because the more you indulge into those things, the deeper the groove gets in your brain, and the steeper the slope is, and the easier it is to slide down that slope. That is why people that battle with addictions like, why can't I break this? I've been battling with this for years, because that slope and that groove is so embedded into your brain that your flesh wants it and wants it. And lust is something that your flesh just wants more and more and more and more and more of, and it just pulls and pulls and pulls. And that is why addiction is so hard. It doesn't matter what type of addiction it is, hard to break out of. It's not impossible. Everything is possible with Jesus' name, but it's hard.
And you said it key there. I actually heard, again, none of us are doctors,
no,
but I heard there was a podcast I was listening to, and it was a psychiatrist or psychologist. He was like a counselor, professional. And somebody had called in, and they were battling with the pornography, and they'd actually been sober for X amount of years on alcohol. And he says, I used to be an alcoholic, I got sober, and now this is the next thing I'm dealing with. And he said, this is going to be a harder addiction to break than your alcohol.
100%.
He said that's how powerful that is.
And here's why, is because it's done in the shadows. And there's a lot of shame.
That's exactly what he
said. There's a lot of shame that goes along with it, 100%, bro, because the devil is like, no, nobody has to know about this right here. Nobody has to, this can be our little thing over here, and the devil will lie to you, and you'll get into those lies, and you'll believe him because it makes your flesh feel good. And that's the worst possible place that you can be in, and it will take you to some dark places.
Yes, and I would just want to encourage somebody today, men, if you do have that struggle, Jesus Christ can break that.
100%.
You need to get good men around you.
Talk about it.
Talk about it. Don't hide in the shadows. Be honest. Get some good brothers around you, and let them hold you accountable. Let them. And you know, by the grace of God, you will get out of that and get through that.
And there's tools out there. I know Covenant Eyes is one of them, where it monitors your screen, and it's a VPN that helps you with that. That's a good thing. I read a book one time that talks about men need to learn how to bounce their eyes. You know, Jesus said that when you gaze on a woman, you know, you've already committed adultery in your heart. That's that second look. It's not the first look that gets you. It's the second look. You know, it's not the first. It wasn't the first bite that pulled humanity into sin. It was the second bite when Adam came in, and that's what brought us down. But I want to go back to that turning point, because things didn't stop there. As I was exposed in junior high, There was smoking, there was drinking, there was still the pornography, there was sexuality, being attracted to women and different things like that. We would have, back in Chicago, we would have what's called juke parties. And
Say again?
Juke parties.
Juke parties.
Yeah, okay. And it was essentially a woman lap dancing on you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that was house music and is a big thing in Chicago, and that's the parties that we would have. And when you don't want to live for Christ, that's what you engage in. And I had in my adolescent years, I had zero desire to live for Christ. I was being rejected at home. I was dealing with I was being physically beaten by my dad when I was 13, and then another turning point that happened was in Sauk Village when I was in 8th grade. The first time that my dad ever really laid his bald fist hands on me was when he beat me into the garage door in front of my friends, and I had to learn. You talk about not only just battling rejection, I had to learn how to bury my feelings very early on, because as he beat me, I didn't do anything but freeze up. And he's since apologized for it. And again, I place honor on my dad. This is just my life. Yeah. It's just what it is. And as he beat me, I became so scared and so feared that I balled up and I froze and I didn't know what to do. Right. And then he just walked away because he had walked from our house down to my friend's house where we were playing basketball. And I remember somehow my friend's house and our house were angled. You can see both of our backyards. Right. I remember my brother leaving, and I was not being a good brother. I'll take accountability for myself. I was picking on my little brother, as most older brothers do. But it wasn't nothing crazy. But my dad took that as an opportunity to, okay, I'm going to teach him a lesson. He's 13 now. He's getting some, testosterone built up in his system, getting his big chest. I'm going to teach him he can't, beat on his little brother. I remember being called by my other brother, because I got 3 brothers. My other brother was calling us from the balcony of our house and yelling at Chaz, Chaz, Chaz. And I look over and I saw the fear in his eyes and said, Dad's coming. He's on his way. And I'm like, oh my God. I told my friends, I'm like, I got to go. And as I started walking towards the garage to go down the driveway, he met me in the driveway. No words were said. No words were spoken. I remember, I take that back. I remember like, Dad, is everything okay? Do. And he probably beat me 10 feet into the garage door. And I remember hearing that garage door bang as my body just slammed against it. That was a turning point for mine and my dad's relationship, and that's a big part of my testimony that we'll get into here in a little bit. But I remember having to bottle my feelings up and learning how to put my feelings in isolation almost, and not being able to expose them to people, because after that happened, I was holding back tears so hard that I had to turn my head away from my friends. And my one friend knew what I was going through. And I do believe God puts good, even if they're not Christian people, I do believe God puts good people in our life, to help us along in different stages of life. And he looked at me, and all he did, and this is the power of presence. I heard a preacher one time that there's ministry in presence, just being there for somebody. Because he put his hand on my shoulder and he just squeezed it for a second. He was like, "It'll be all right, bro." And I said, but let me say this, that wasn't a sigh of relief. That was almost a sigh of me pulling my feelings together and then burying them. And I had to learn how to bury my feelings at a very early age. One of the great things that happened, because my childhood wasn't all bad, one of the great things that happened is I started dating my now wife in 8th grade. So me and her met in 8th grade, and we started dating in 8th grade, and I was a knucklehead and she broke up with me. And then we ended up rekindling in 2020, and now here we are married.
I remember you guys sharing a little bit about that story. Hey, you know what? God said, hey.
God has a plan.
He had a plan from the beginning.
God has a plan. So after 8th grade, we moved out of Sauk Village. We were there for 2 years. And I was so upset because I had friends and I had, a community and neighborhood, and we'd ride around the neighborhood playing basketball and football. I felt accepted. I felt like, man, I love this. I don't want to lose this, but I had to lose it because we moved away. Sauk Village was getting very bad, at the time. A lot of drugs coming into the neighborhood,
Right.
a lot of gangs coming into the neighborhood, and that's when I started getting exposed to the gang life. I wasn't necessarily deep into the gang life at that point, coming in junior high, but I was starting to get exposed to it. My friends, their dads were selling drugs, so you may not be in it, but if you're at the barbecue and you're walking through the barbecue and they're in the house cutting up, like,
Yeah.
you're exposed to it.
Yeah.
You're exposed to the culture. So high school, very difficult for me. I will say in my life, because I didn't know how to navigate through my life, high school was probably the most difficult time in my life, where I got back into that isolation hard. Freshman year, I went from Sauk Village, and then we moved to Park Forest. I went to a high school called Rich East High School, and it was bad. It was dark. I walked down the hallways surrounded by 200 other kids and felt alone. I felt that I had absolutely no one. Image was changing, and I had no friends coming into it. The acquaintances that I knew were only from sports, because I was into football,
Right.
and wrestling and weight training and different stuff like that. So I was around people, but I was never accepted. Even when I would perform, I wasn't the greatest athlete. It was, I could have definitely been better, but even when I did well, it was still like that was never accepted. And I was trying to find identity in sports. My dad was a truck driver. He was back on the road, and he was gone for a week or two at a time. And I would tell him when he would come home, because it was almost like a tornado came back home. And I would tell him, like, dude, I hate it when you come home. Like, I really do, because it's like we're safe and we're at peace when you come home, or when you're gone. And now you come home and you have torn it all up.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was. And then I had, in our home, we had 3 floors, and I was in the top floor all the way down the hallway. So not only was I in mental and emotional isolation and rejection, but I was also now in physical rejection. So if I was doing something in my room, whether that be smoking or drinking or bagging up drugs or whatever the case may be, I can hear somebody coming down the hallway. So the devil will teach you how to be good at sin.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not like he's out there just forcing people.
No.
If you do not have a light of Jesus Christ that is guiding you, and you are just letting your life happen, or you are just opening yourself up to whatever that
Right.
he wants to bring into your life, he will teach you how to be good at sin. So I got very good at being sinful.
Yeah.
I got very good at hiding things. I got very good at masking my rejection.
Right. And you were in isolation with it. This is such a powerful thing, because you were left to your own devices. You were, like you said, you were far away from anybody. You were able to get kind of more deeper and deeper into it, where you were doing more and more. And so it's bad. I mean, you really do need accountability. You need people around you.
100%.
And so yeah, I mean, you started getting into the drugs you're talking about and things like that. And so let's talk a little bit about kind of where that went, and then let's kind of get into what changed for the good after that.
Well, the good didn't come till about 10 years after
Okay.
that. I'll be honest with you, and I do want to touch base on a lot of that dark, because the reason why I am the way that I am now is because I got so dark, and I got into a really dark place. So how I started getting more into smoking weed and partying and girls and women and different things like that was some of the guys who were in the neighborhood who I went to high school with, one of my buddies down the street, and then on the football team, we all started hanging out, started smoking. I was out late, smoking, and I even remember stealing from my mom's purse, just to be able to go chip in to buy some drugs. So again, I was not a good person. I'll be honest with you. Between probably 16 and early 20s, I wasn't a good person. And I remember walking through high school so angry that it was just on me. like a mask. And people would ask me, Chaz, why are you so angry? I'm not angry. You know, I'm not angry. What are you talking about? They're like, no, dude, there's something wrong with you. You're angry. But there was so much rage that was built inside of me. And part of what happened was that anger will turn into rage, and then rage turns into murder. And my junior year of high school, I started contemplating suicide. And I wanted the pain to stop. I was so sick and tired of just being alive. I was so sick and tired of feeling. You know, I didn't want to feel the pain anymore, the rejection.
There's no joy.
There was no joy in my life at all. I saw no reason to live. I wasn't walking with Christ. My home life was horrible. School life was even worse. You know, it was bad. You know, I started getting in fights, you know, at school, in the locker room. I started stealing from people. You know, I was finding anything that could try to give me an adrenaline rush or put a smile on my face, because I battled food addiction, because it felt good, you know, and there was comfort in food. And I'm just like, I want to feel good somehow, because I feel so horrible as a person. And so my junior year of high school, I started contemplating suicide. And my junior year of high school turned into my senior year of high school, where them thoughts were still there. And I actually would walk through the hallways my senior year of high school, and there was about a 4-month time frame where I planned to shoot at my school. And I would walk through the hallways and I would map it out, and I would watch people. And I was very methodical and evil about this, because I would walk into school and I knew where people were going to be at, and I knew what time that they were going to be here. And I said, you're going to be there at that time. And I would watch one person for about a week. And sure enough, like clockwork, they were there, because we were on a schedule. We were in school, you know. And then I'd walk down the hallway and I'd say, you're going to be right there, aren't you? And I bend the corner, and sure enough, that person's right there. And I would peep where their locker rooms are at. And I would watch people in the hallway in their classrooms. And I would see where the teachers are standing. I said, okay, that teacher's standing right there every day. That's where they're posted at. Where's the security guard, or where's the police officer? They're going to be right there every single day. You know what, matter of fact, in this hallway, between this time and this time, police officers aren't in that hallway. And then the front office the staff is getting ready for the day. They won't have any idea. So the only thing that stopped me from killing people in my high school and shooting on my high school was, at the time, I didn't have access to a gun. If I would have had access to a gun, I would have killed people. And I even took it so far where I mapped out when I was going to save the last bullet for myself, and I knew the bathroom that I was gonna go into, and I knew where I was gonna kill myself. And I remember I would walk into this bathroom in the senior hallway. It was the middle of the hallway, and I would walk in and I would stare at the spot on the floor, and I knew, like, that's the spot. That's where I'm gonna die. That's where I'm going to kill myself, right there. I knew exactly how I was going to hold the gun. I said, you know, I'm going to save one last bullet. I'm not going to put it in the magazine. I'm not going to put it in the chamber. I'm going to save one last bullet. So when people start going crazy and when cops start rolling around, I'm going to dip off into this bathroom. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to lean my back against the wall. I knew how I would, even so far, I knew how I was going to talk to God in those last final moments. I knew what I was going to say to him. God, I'm sorry. I hurt so bad.
Take your time, bro.
And he was there for me.
Amen.
He was there for me.
Yes.
In those moments when I was thinking about taking my life.
Yes.
When I was thinking about all of this, I think about my sons, and I think about my wife, and I think about my future son, and I think about this podcast, and I think about people, and I'm like, I was going to end it then, and he saved me from that. And that is why I tell people, like, bro, I remember being in that bathroom, and I haven't thought about this in years, but I told you I'm going to preach my life.
Yes.
I remember being in that bathroom and the walls closing in, and so many times I would stare at the spot on the floor where I was going to sit down and kill myself. I was going to put the gun just like this. I didn't want there to be a chance that I would come. I wasn't going to go like this. I was going to make sure it went through everything. And I remember staring at that spot and just the whole room time and time again getting dark. And I felt the evil around me. And I would make sure that I would go into that bathroom to think about those final moments when other people were in class. Teacher, can I go to the bathroom? I didn't have to go to the bathroom. I wanted to fantasize. That's how dark my mind got. I wanted to, in that point in my life, I wanted to fantasize about taking someone's life. I wanted to be able to look them in the eyes and be able to see their final breaths. And I didn't want to just kill people with a bullet. I wanted to strangle people at that point in time in my life. That's how much I let the enemy get a hold of me. Yeah. It was pure evil that I was just allowing into my life, and my flesh loved it because I was getting an adrenaline rush off of it. And I'm like, people are going to know me now. They're not going to reject me now. They're going to know my name now. They're going to know who I am now. And that was just the lies of the enemy. And he was there for me in those moments, bro.
Man.
He was there for me. Getting out of high school, it wasn't much better. I was just out of school.
Yeah.
I had more freedom to get involved in drugs and drinking and women and pornography, and that is when I really started to get into running with the gang. Is I became a conservative vice lord in Chicago, and again, I'm not trying to hype up or be boastful about anything that I did.
Right.
You know, it's just what I did.
It's just a testament to what God did.
100%, bro. 100%. So, but I remember as I start, because I was always attracted to it, and as I started to be around more and more of the friends that was happening. What's crazy is, my friend, who I'm still friends with today, he's since walked away from the gang as well. And our other friend, he's been locked up so many times, but God has saved his life countless times. And he's since got sober. And I firmly believe that me and him showing him how to live right is why he's been able to get sober and walk at least a normal life. I'm not saying that he's holy and sanctified and coming to church every day, but at least he knows, like, I'm not drunk and high all the time, you know. But the oath that I pledged to become a vice lord, I didn't have to get jumped in because my best friend, his stepdad was our chief. You know, he was a 5-star universal vice lord, so he was the top of the top. He did whatever he wanted to do. And he looked at me and asked me, he says, "I see you've been rocking a little bit." I said, "Yeah." He's like, "You want in?" And I was like, "Yeah." Without hesitation, Without hesitation. Yeah. And he goes, "You know what this takes, right?" And I'm like, "No, but I still want it." He was like, "I've had friends that died for this." And I'm like, "All right, let's do it." And he got up and we started to recite an oath. How you recite the oath is that you put your right hand over your left hand like this, and you cover your belly. And the left hand is meant to be the dragon. And you put it over your belly. And the right hand is meant to be Allah, that covers the dragon and holds him at bay. And within inside of you is this beast. And you cover your hands like this, and you put it over your belly to tame the beast inside of you and to keep it inside of you. And that is how I stood in front of him to recite this oath.
Wow.
And in that oath, I pledged my allegiance to vice lords. I pledged my allegiance to him as a chief. I pledged my allegiance to the whole nation. And then I pledged my allegiance to Allah. And Allah is not the same as Christ.
No.
He is a false god.
Yes.
He is not the one true God.
No.
Muhammad was just a man.
Yes.
You know, but at that time, I began to get introduced to the Nation of Islam because that's what the vice lord followed. No pork, you know, we didn't pray throughout the week and daily, but we prayed. We had what's called golds on Friday evening, and we would face towards the east and the sun, and we would pray and lift up Allah, and you would do all of that, bro. And that's why that's what I did. And what's crazy is, because Christ's foundation was inside of me, I knew that what I was reciting was wrong. I'm like, do I really want to say this right now? I couldn't back out.
What do you think? You knew what was right. You said you had a foundation on Christ. What do you think that kept you from turning away at that point? That kept you going into that?
I had nothing else.
Mm.
I was still in isolation.
So you believed the lie of the enemy that you had no other options.
100%.
Yeah.
I was still hurting.
Mm.
I was very much still hurting. Part of how I think God flipped the tables on the enemy in my life, so to speak, because I do believe that as a leader, as a true leader, as somebody in ministry, even as a Christian, there has to be a level of you not caring what people think.
Yes.
Jesus, I promise you, loved on everybody.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a conversation, hopefully, when I get to heaven, and I'm going to ask him, did you really care about what people think? And he's probably going to say no.
No.
Like, no, I didn't care about what people think. Even Paul talks about it.
Yeah.
He came and he preached the gospel, and he said, I've preached it, you heard it, you don't want to accept it, I'm going to move on to the next people. You have to not care necessarily what people think. You still love on them.
Absolutely.
You care about them. You care about their soul. You care about if they're going to make it to heaven. But as far as people's opinions go, it's like, what are people's opinions?
Let
They're
God
just opinions.
be true and every man a liar.
Thank you, bro.
It's important.
Thank you. Put some Bible on
There's
it.
only one truth.
Exactly, bro. There is only one truth. So around that time, because anger and rage and murder, that spirit started to build up inside of me and get more
Just
and more
grew
and
and
more.
grew.
It grew and grew. I started recruiting people and guys from the neighborhood, and I used to love beating on people. We would jump them in, and I used to love disciplining people.
Mm-hmm.
They jump out of line and they catch a violation, and I used to love boxing in the basement. I used to love beating on people because
it was that pain that you were able to
it was
inflict
pain
on people
exactly
that
100%.
you were feeling.
100%, bro. I was feeling so much pain that I just wanted somebody else to feel it as well.
Man, I just feel, well, you're kind of going through this evolution of how you got darker and darker and darker. You just got even worse. I've heard a preacher one time talk about how in the garden the serpent was a snake, and in Revelation he's a dragon.
Yeah.
And that wasn't for me. I heard a preacher talking about that one time, and how it's what you feed. You just kept feeding
100%.
that anger inside of you, that darkness, the thoughts of the enemy, the things that the devil was lying to you about. You just kept feeding that.
Yeah.
And your spirit in that way, and that darkness grew.
Yeah. I had so much rage inside of myself that I didn't know how to contain it. I thought I could contain it, but you can't contain it. I didn't know how to contain it. I'd walk through my house. I'd punch holes in walls. Yeah. I used to love going to football practice. I'm like, I'm about to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
And in football, it's a good thing sometimes. You know what I'm saying? It's a sport.
Let it out a little bit.
But it let it out a little bit. But I did, the healthy side about that is that men do need a physical outlet to be able to, especially at a younger age, to release testosterone and to release all the hormones and endorphins and everything. You gotta have an outlet.
Yeah.
You need to have Christ at the center of that outlet, whatever that outlet may be, because if Christ is not a center of your outlet, then you will make the enemy the center of the outlet, and he will put whatever he wants into that outlet, and that will become your outlet. And when you indulge into that outlet, you feel so low afterwards because it meant nothing.
Yeah.
That is why when you indulge, I don't want to say indulge. When you walk with Christ, you become alive.
Yes.
When you walk with Christ, that light begins to build inside of you. When you walk with Christ, you begin to become a new person.
Yes.
Bible says, be renewed. Yes. Renew your mind. It starts your mind. Renew your mind. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So if you get the thoughts in your mind, and if you start to become disciplined in your mind, it will start to get rooted and buried in your heart, and then out of that comes good things. But because I was indulging into so much bad,
it was rotten. It was rotten fruit,
bro. It was all
the fruit
rotten
of the
fruit.
Spirit.
It was not the fruit of the Spirit. It was all rotten fruit that I was producing in my life. What happened to me, what caused my life to just smack and hit a brick wall, was I got with my baby mama at the time, and again, things got worse. But what caused me to hit that brick wall was that I had my son. And I said, okay, I got to start to change. Now, I stopped gangbanging. I'm like, okay, obviously standing on the corner, throwing up gang signs, standing on the corner, selling drugs, or posted up in the house on the corner, selling drugs, partying all the time, in a reckless way. Obviously, I can't do that anymore because I have a son. I need to get a better job. I need to provide for him, but what really brought my life to a head with Christ was when I became a single parent. And when me and my baby mama, we got together, we had our first son, and then 18 months later we had Isaiah, who's our second, and he was the one that, because I was a single parent when he was 4 months old, she left, baby mama left, I was left on my own. And I was like, all right, God, I'm at a low point, and I know where I need to go back to. And I remember I was 23 at the time, 23, 24. And I was in my house. And it's crazy because I've always been a hard worker, and I've always known how to go out and get it, so to speak. Even when I was selling drugs, I know how to go out and get it, But so I was starting to experience some successes in my life. I purchased a condo, and, I got the car, and I'm getting a stable job now, and I'm moving along in life, and then boom, life smacks you. Mm-hmm. And I became a single parent. And baby mama split up, and she disappears. Wow. And just never came back, And I remember being awake at like 2, 3 a.m. C is a toddler. My son Charles is a toddler. And he's in his room sleeping, and Isaiah's with me, and Isaiah's sick, and he's got the flu real bad, and I'm up feeding him, and I'm a 20-something-year-old kid, barely into adulthood, and he's crying, and I don't know what to do, and I cried out to God that night. Yeah, I cried out to God. I'm just like, I remember sitting at the bed holding him, just in tears, not knowing how to get this baby. A baby's cry hits deep, especially when it's your own child. And you love them so much that you want to take this pain away from him, but you can't take the pain away from him. You can just be there to comfort him. And so when he finally went to sleep, I got on my hands and knees at that bedside, and I'm like, God, I'm done. I am so tired of the life that I have been living. I cried out to him in tears because I was so tired of hurting, and I was so tired of the rejection, and I was so tired of the pain, and I was so tired of dealing with this inner turmoil. I was tired, bro. Yeah. So I cried out to God that night, and I said, God, I need you. I need you to show up in my life. Well, right after that, I lost my job. The guy who I was working for just totally snaked me. Me and him got into it, and if you think I'm hard-headed now, if think of me 10, 15 years ago, I didn't know you back then. I had a mouth on me, bro. I had a mouth on me, so me and him had got into it hard, and rightfully so. He was disrespectful, and I got disrespectful. None of us were right in the situation. Right. It was just we were both wrong. Yeah. In that respect, and especially as the employee, I think I was. I don't want to say I was more wrong, but when as an employee, you should be submitted to leadership, just as when you're in ministry, you should be into leadership. So I got mouthy. He fired me from the job, so I had absolutely nothing. And now I'm like, okay, God, now what? I got nothing. I got no job. I got these 2 boys that I need to put diapers on. So I went back to, and I had just got back into church. Like I had just started going back to, because at 16 years old, they suspended me from church because I had, going back to that time, I had got into it with one of the kids at church. And I remember he had grabbed my coat, and I turned my coat, and he ripped my coat. And me and him, since we reconciled years later, but he ripped my coat. And I was lifting weights back then, just like I lift weights now. And he was much smaller than me, and I probably had him by at least 40 pounds. So I grabbed him by the throat and hung him up on the wall. and his feet were up off of the wall. And I remember it was like after church, all the youth are hanging around.
Right.
I remember the whole room getting silent and everybody just like, yo. And I remember the youth pastor at the time coming and grabbing me. And they're even at 16 years old. I was like 16, 17 years old. It took 3 guys to get me up off of him.
I believe it.
Because I was so enraged.
Yeah.
It was almost a demonic strength that was inside of me. But so there was that time. And then they had talked to my parents and everything like that, still let me come back to youth. But then a couple months later, that same guy and one of his friends put his hands on my little brother. So I actually showed up. I remember I was definitely 17 years old because I had my license at the time. So I took my parents' car, rolled up to church. It was Wednesday night service. I didn't go to church, but I went to church and I picked a fight at church. And I walked into the youth. And I stopped everybody. And as soon as I walked through the door, because I made sure that I walked in like 20 minutes after services started, I walked in enraged. And everybody saw it. It was me and my other friend. Walked in enraged. And my friend, I kind of looped him into it. He didn't know what was going to happen. I was like, hey, I just need you to roll with me. He was like, all right, bet. So we roll up to church, to our church at the time. I walk in. And as soon as I swung open the door, the youth pastor looks up from the pulpit, looks at me, goes, Chaz, you okay? I'm like, nah. And I called these guys out. And I was cussing inside of the youth service. And I was telling these guys, come on, let's go right now. Meet me outside. We're gonna square this up right now. And I started stepping to them, and they had to come, and they had to push me back and had to force me out of the building. Because I was ready to fight those guys. So
that rage was everywhere. It didn't matter if it was a church, it was a school. It
didn't matter to me, bro. I sold drugs in the church.
Wow.
It didn't matter to me, bro.
You had no limits. You had no boundaries.
I had no limits because I was so far removed from wanting to have anything to do with Christ.
And that's what the devil does. It takes
100%.
There's no boundaries with him.
There is no boundaries with it. You can't sit there and just tiptoe on sin.
No.
You're either all in
you.
It consumed me, and it consumed me, bro, and it consumed me hard. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I liked it back then because again, I'm dealing with so much rejection, I'm dealing with so much pain, I'm dealing with so much of everything that just something emotional felt good for me that I just wanted more of it. And I said, if I can control people with my rage, with my anger, at least I feel something.
You felt like you were somebody,
I felt like I was somebody, but I was nobody.
Yeah.
I was nobody, So I went home, and immediately my mom's blowing up my cell phone. It was back in the day we had flip phones.
Yeah, I remember those.
My mom's blowing up my cell phone, leaving me a voicemail. What did you do? So-and-so just called me. The pastor just called me. And within 5 minutes, the whole church knew what had went down.
Wow.
And my parents were in leadership at the church.
Yeah.
They were known in the church. So that next day after school, I walk in, and I didn't go home. I didn't come home till like 10 o'clock at night. I went smoking, and I was just, and even my friend who knew nothing about Christ, he grew up Catholic, knew that was the most that he knew. He even looked at me. He was like, bro, what was that? And I was like, what you mean, bro? He was like, dude, you about to tear that guy up. I said, I was. He's like, why did you ask me to come? I was like, I just back up. He was like, no, don't ask me to do that again. He saw that evil coming out of me that he didn't even want nothing to do with it. And he had zero relationship with Christ, let alone a foundation with Christ. But he's like, I don't want nothing to do with this. So they showed up, the youth pastor showed up to my house the next day and was like, Chaz, I can't let you come back to youth. I was a literal danger to people coming back to youth Rightfully at that point, and he did the right thing, in making sure that I didn't come back. But he was like, he said it was only for like a month, but I never went back.
Yeah.
And that's what spiraled me into everything, into teenage years, into adulthood, and then into getting involved with my baby mama, and then becoming a single parent, and just all of that. It was a spiral.
And so since then, which is a really good picture you painted there in the story, since then you hadn't been back at the church, and you said that you're a single dad, you're desperate, you're calling out to God, in this time of desperation. Now let's talk about, what did that look like when you were coming back, and when you finally hit that moment of, I need to get right?
So the kind of that turning point for me in my life was that single parent moment. And I knew that I needed to get my life right with Christ. So I started coming back to church. I pretty much just stepped away from the gang entirely, told him I wasn't coming back. I did lose my job, so I kind of went back to what I knew, which was selling drugs. So I was selling drugs when I was a single parent in the early stages, and I'm not proud of it, but I just, that's what I knew what to do, So then I was coming back to church. What changed for me, and this goes for anybody, what changed for me is that I not only started, it wasn't church that changed me, it was the Word of God that changed me.
Yeah.
Because as I started to come back to church, and I do believe that it's right that everybody who calls themselves a Christian shows up for church and gets around your brothers and sisters in Christ, your like-minded people, and worship God in the sanctuary, But it was the Word of God that was getting instilled inside of me and to change my life. So as I became more on fire for God in service, I'm like, I want more of this. I know who Christ is because I know that my parents put a good foundation in me. I know that He is the answer to everything that I'm going through. So I started to get back in my Word, and I started just to read the Bible. And as simple as that sounds, bro, that's what I started to do, is just to read the Bible. I started to get my health in order. I had lost like 80 pounds. At that time, I was very, very unhealthy, very, very overweight, no muscle mass at all, just almost 300 pounds.
You were bulking.
I was bulking in all the wrong ways. But I started to get my life in order. I started to get my life in order mentally, emotionally, physically, in every which way, and most importantly spiritually with Christ. How that change started to become a habit was because I practice it. And I failed so many times. I failed so many times at cussing, and I'm like, oh God, all right, next time, I'll work on it. I failed so many times at having road rage. Next time, I failed so many times at, mistreating somebody. Next time. And it's a practice. A lie that the enemy will tell us is that you have to get it perfect right away. No. But that's not true, because again, going back to what we first started talking about, there's always going to be that turmoil between your flesh and your spirit, man, when you are trying to walk with Christ. If you think that the devil's just going to let you walk out of your bondage into a life with Christ, it's just not happening, bro.
Paul says in Philippians 3:13, I have to put back, the past and press forward,
exactly.
Press towards the mark.
And sometimes pressing hurts.
Yeah.
Sometimes pressing is a battle, and sometimes pressing is repetitive.
Yes.
And repetitively, day in, I had to pick up my cross every single day, daily, and just practice the fruits of the Spirit. I had to practice kindness. I had to practice love. I had to practice being there for my kids. I had to practice being a good employee. I had to practice making sure that I was getting my mind right. And some things came quicker than others. I didn't quit smoking weed until probably a year after I came back to church.
Yeah.
Because I would smoke weed, or I would come home from church, put the kids down for a nap, and then I'd go smoke weed. There was time. God gave me time. He is so loving because He was patient with me to be able to work on it. But I will say there came a time where God was like, all right, enough is enough, And I remember so many times driving after I had just picked up weed and hearing God telling me, throw it out the window.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and sometimes I did it and sometimes I didn't do it, and I would feel so good when I did throw it out the window, because I'm like, this thing doesn't have control over me anymore.
That's right. You were letting those chains.
I was breaking those chains, bro, hard. And then there was times that I didn't, and I felt so much shame because I knew that God had so much more for me. He was convicting me hard, bro, 100%. And I became a prophet. I stepped into leadership at my church. I became a youth leader on a part of the team there, and I was helping these kids, just learn how to really be who God had called them to be at an early age. And I had became a prophet in the church that I was at. I was ordained prophet, and I was my pastor's armor bearer, and I was on fire for God, bro. One of the things that broke with me. I've never spoken about this publicly, bro. It's the first time I'll speak about this publicly ever. One of the things that stayed with me in my life was pornography and that addiction. I battled that addiction for 18 years.
Yeah.
It was a long time.
It's a strong one.
That it was a very, very strong one. And I want to encourage some men out here, because I've been approached to even men with inside of pop that have they have said, can you pray for me? Can you speak this, because I've been battling this and I've been battling and I want to give it up, and I want to. The key to bringing that thing from addiction to recovery is talking about it and getting it in the light, because that thing wants to hide itself so much. There's so much shame that is attached to it. But if you can come out of that and talk to somebody, you can get free. And that's exactly what I did. There was a man who I trusted, and that's key. It has to be somebody that you trust. Any addiction, especially one that brings so much shame. I talked to him about it, and he helped me to give me practical things, practical advice. And like you said earlier, that accountability, he helped me to be accountable in that season with my life, you know. And I will say I battled it for a couple of years after that, but eventually was able to just become free. There's when you experience the freedom of Christ, it's unreal, bro.
It's like no other. Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it's from, bro. Whether it's rejection or unforgiveness or addiction. I remember there's been so many times at this altar that you are praying, I'm praying for people, and you see the chains falling off of them. You see them walking into freedom, and they come up and their face is full of life and color and light, and you see it on them. That is what I live for, bro. I have fallen in love with the altar and what God does at the altar. When I preached last month on that Wednesday, I told our pastor, my favorite moment out of that entire time was seeing God move on people at the altar on a Wednesday night service. It ain't got to be Sunday. It ain't got to be conference. It's whenever you come up to the altar to meet Christ is when he's going to choose to encounter you. He's always there. He is always ready for you to come up to him. It's up to you to decide, are you going to tap into the service? Are you going to tap into the music? Are you going to tap into the praise and worship? Are you going to tap into the word? Because that's what he wants. Bible says he stands at the door and knocking.
Knocks. Yeah.
Consistently,
it's up to
he's
us
there.
to make that choice.
We have to do the work. We have to make that choice. We have to be the ones that open that door. I came to that point in my life because I finally opened the door to what Christ had for me.
Yes.
And then I got hit again. And I was on fire for Christ. And I was what I thought living my life right. And I was in my word, and I was consistent. I was going to church, and I was raising my sons right, and I got a new job, and I talk about it all the time. And then I caught my felonies.
Yes.
And then I got charged with those felonies, and I didn't do anything wrong. I was using my weapon in a point that I thought I had to use my weapon. Well, Illinois didn't see it that way. They charged me with a Class 4 and a Class 1 felony. The Class 1 felony carried a sentence from probation to 15 years in prison. I stayed up countless nights in tears and in turmoil thinking, 15 years? My sons will be in their 20s at that time.
They would never know you.
They would never know. What would happen if I went away for 15 years? And then I get indicted by the courts, and they said, nah, you might have not have done that, but we still want to make sure you go to jail. So then they hit me with the Class 4 felony. And the Class 4 felony was 1 to 4 years in jail. And I'm like, all right, God, that's better. But, I still don't want to do that.
Right.
And I remember being locked up in Cook County Jail. The evil that I felt in that place was like the evil that I used to feel back in my childhood. And just pure evil.
Yeah.
Is in that place.
Just darkness. Yeah.
Just complete darkness in that place. And I was different.
Yes.
And I kept my head down, and I I didn't get booked where I got put on a deck. I ended up getting out on bond, but a condition of my bond was house arrest. There's that isolation again. And I got put back in that isolation. And I got put back into that lonely place. And I got put back into what am I going to do now? You know? And I had lost my job, and I eventually was able to get another job, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be diligent with this job, and I'm going to keep pressing forward with this job. And that job ended up being a good thing because it led me to a promotion, which ended up getting me out here to Arizona. It was crazy because God shows up. If you look for it, if you are seeking him, even in the midst of turmoil, he will show up with some of your most radical blessings that you can experience in my life. I was locked up in house arrest March of 2020 when COVID just happened, in complete isolation. I'm thinking in my head, it's been 14 months of house arrest at this time. I'm not getting off. I'm going to jail. I'm thinking in my head like, oh my God, COVID just happened. What is going on? The world is in turmoil. And then God sends me my wife.
Wow.
And in March of 2020 is when me and her connected back again over Facebook. And I remember sitting up at 3 a.m. because I was working overnights at the time. That's why I was up. And I was up just playing Madden. We were talking about that the other day, but I had nothing else to do. I was on house arrest, so I'm just playing the game. So I played a game, and I was scrolling through my phone while the game was loading, and I saw her picture pop up as a friend request, or as not a friend request, but a suggested friend.
Yeah.
And I'm like, God, there's no way this is her, because again, we dated in 8th grade.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I had written her off as a distant memory,
right? Yeah.
Like just somebody from my past that I'll never see again. And God brings her back. What was crazy about that is we had about 3 or 4 mutual friends for 2-3 years before that, and we never popped up on somebody's suggested friend request. This moment, God reserved our meeting again, our encounter for that moment because he knew what I needed.
Him, and he's a rewarder of those that diligently seek him.
100%, bro.
Yeah.
100%. So at that time, my wife was that light that rejuvenated me in that season. She
Amazing.
really was.
Yeah.
She is so awesome. She would come over to my house. Well, it wasn't even my house. I was staying with somebody at the time. And that's a story because we had got kicked out of our house. We had got evicted because I committed a crime in this place. And I almost went back to Cook County because I didn't have a place to stay because there's restrictions. You got to stay within the county. You got to stay, you got to have somebody, it's got to be approved. And I'm like, I'm a single guy with 2 kids. My kids are staying with my mom because she ended up getting kicked out and she's staying with my brother. So my kids are over there staying with her. I'm like, where do I go? And I got friends, but these friends got wives and families. And I'm like, it's not appropriate for me to go stay over there. And I don't want to burden somebody else like that. But then there's one. There's always one. God is always going to drop that on you at the last minute.
That's right.
And not in the last minute, but in his timing.
Yes.
I take that back. It's in his timing that he does it. He was on time, and he knew exactly what he was doing. For me, it was like, oh my God, this is down to the wire. But it really was because I was in 3 weeks. It was like I was going back to Cook County. Wow. And I did not want to go back to Cook County. And then this situation showed up, and I was able to stay at my friend's house. And and I placed so much honor on him because he was an elderly man who allowed me and my sons to come in there.
For you.
He was there for me 100% with no restrictions, with no what's the word I'm looking for?
No
stipulations. Stipulations,
That's
conditions.
One,
he just opened his home.
Yeah.
That God will use so many people in your life to show his love and his hand on your life. He opened his home and welcomed us in with open arms.
Incredible.
And it was amazing. And I stayed there. I met my wife, or got back in contact with my wife. We started dating. She would come over there and we would have coffee outside, and we would FaceTime and we would talk back and forth. And she was truly what helped me get through those last 6-7 months of house arrest. And I'm like, okay, God knows what you need. If you are real with God, he will be real with you. If you are real with God, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I'm going through. This is what I'm struggling with. He will show up in your life real. So he showed up in my life real. And then I applied for later that year, I applied for a promotion at my job on house arrest. And they gave it to me. on house arrest.
Had to
bro.
be God.
It's 100% God, bro. It's 100% God. And I asked him, I'm like, you guys know I'm on house arrest, right? He's like, it doesn't matter to us because you're exactly what we're looking for in this situation.
Wow.
And we want you to have the job. Crazy enough, that next week, I got off of house arrest.
Wow.
And my lawyer calls me up at 9 o'clock at night, and I'm at work. I'm already excited and pumped about the promotion, you know.
This is good alone, but then...
That's what I'm saying. She calls me at 9 o'clock at night, and I look at my supervisor. I'm like, yo, I got to take this, man. My lawyer don't call me at 9 o'clock at night. So she called me, answer the phone. She goes, hey, Charles. I goes, what's going on? She goes, well, I got an update on your case. I'm like, please tell me. She was like, you're getting off of house arrest tomorrow. The next day I had court. And she's like, you're getting off of house arrest tomorrow. I'm like, thank you, Jesus. And she was like, not only that, all of you, she's like, the 2 felonies that you were charged with, they're both being reduced down to a misdemeanor. And I got a Class D misdemeanor of reckless conduct. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you, Jesus. I'm telling her thank you and this and that. And she had to pause me and almost grab me over the phone. She's like, Charles, stop. Yeah. I'm like, no, I'm happy. She's like, no, you need to stop and understand what is going on here, because this doesn't happen when you get, she says, I have another client who's charged with these felonies and he's currently in Cook County Jail while you're at home on house arrest. He's going to go away. When you get charged with these type of felonies, you don't go home. You go to jail and you go to prison. This is unheard of. Yeah. And my response to her was, well, I got a God that does the impossible.
Come on, yeah.
And she laughed. She ain't a Christian, but it's cool. Yeah. But she knew what it was. Yeah. And I felt the Holy Spirit in that. I'm like, this is all God. And then I went to Cook County Jail, or I had my court date over video chat because it was COVID at the time. I had my court date, and I wanted to get out of that court date so fast. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Just yes. Do you understand? Yes, yes, yes. I knew what was happening. She gave me the stipulations of me being released and everything like that. She was like, okay, you can go up to Cook County and you can return your monitoring device and you can get your ankle bracelet cut off and this and that. Bro, I hung up the FaceTime, went and grabbed the device, unplugged it immediately, threw it in my truck, and booked it to Cook County from where I was at, bro. I booked it to Cook County. I checked in with the place. They gave me the address. It was right across the street was their office. I checked in with them. I walked in, and the guy walks in with a pair of scissors, and he goes, you want to do it? I said, absolutely.
Yes, please.
Bro, I came in, I cut that ankle bracelet off so hard, and I walked out of there so happy, bro. When you pursue God, he shows up for you. That is why I speak the way that I do. That is why right now I feel for me and my ministry, I feel so charged to move and to press, like you were talking about, to press forward and be who God has called me to be, because I know that there are people out there that are hurting. I know that there are people out there that need to be saved, and I know what God has done for me in my life. That is why I speak as radical that I do. That is why I am unapologetically myself, because this is who God made me to be, and I may still be rough around the edges, and he's still working on me, and he's going to continue to work on me, and I am not perfect, and I am still just not as bad as I used to be, obviously.
That's it.
But I am on a pursuit to walk into what God has called me to, and I feel so charged to do it now because I know what he has delivered me out of. I have seen his hand come down and comfort me. I have seen his hand come down and wipe my tears away. I have seen him come down and just embrace me with love and a hug. And it's nothing that I can do on my own. I submitted to it. I put in the work. I put my faith to action. But ultimately, it was God that showed up in my life. And I give him all the glory for it, bro.
Bro, well, I'm going to tell you this, Jazz. God has done amazing things in your life, but he's still not done with you yet.
Absolutely not.
God is still not done. You're such a blessing, like I said before we opened this podcast, at this local assembly at POP. And
bro,
I know
I'm ready to change the world. I don't mean to cut you off, bro.
Yes.
But I'm ready to change the world.
Absolutely.
I feel so charged, especially being plugged into an amazing church
Yes.
like Pop and being submitted
Yeah.
under an amazing pastor like our pastor is, dude. I feel charged to just change the world. And that just doesn't mean on a big stage. That means on the day-to-day life
Yes.
when you're interacting with people. That's the local assembly. That's my family. I feel charged right now, bro.
Praise God.
To go.
Glory to God.
100% glory to God, bro.
Amen. Well, Chaz, I mean, I know for a fact that there's so many more details. There's so many more things.
Part 2, bro.
There's got to be a part 2. We got to do a part 2 because this was too good not to. And I'm sure that there's so many other things that had happened before and that are still happening now. Yeah. And because of time, of course, we do want to get this episode closed out. Yeah. You shared a lot of things. You shared some dark things that happened to you. Yeah. You went through and you really gave us a picture of what God did. Yeah, and the power of God, and how when you turn your life to Christ, how He changed you, transformed you. Yeah. It's a powerful testimony, and I'm so grateful to be here and to hear it. And many others are going to be blessed by this. I hope so. What I want to do before we go, I just want to ask if there's anything that you have to say to people out there, just a quick word of encouragement after they've listened in and they've got to hear a lot of what you shared. Yeah. Is there something that you can tell somebody?
Absolutely. Don't give up.
Yes.
As simple as it sounds, as kind of cliche as it sounds, don't give up. As I said in the beginning of this podcast, there's people that you are called to. We are all called to save lives. We are all called to win souls. We are all called to make disciples and speak the name of Christ. 100% that's what we're doing. If you are the one that's struggling, if you are the one that can relate to anything that I was talking about right now, do not give up. There is a God of peace. There is a God of comfort. There is a God of love that will come in if you open that door, that He is standing there knocking. He will come in and He will give that to you. There is nothing that is impossible with God. And a lot of times in my life, I know I have sought those impossible things from man, and they have disappointed me every single time. And I know there's somebody that has been disappointed time and time and time again. But I promise you, if you get sold out, no matter what darkness you're dealing with, no matter what fight, no matter what struggle, no matter if you can't even look at yourself in the mirror at times, because I know there's been times in my life where I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror because I was afraid of who was looking back at me, and I was disgusted with who I saw in the mirror. It doesn't matter if you're at that low point. Pick yourself up and get in the face of God. Humble yourself before the throne, and I promise you, He's going to make it better. And if He doesn't make it better in this life, He's going to make it better in glory.
That's right.
Because the reward that we will get in glory cannot even compare to the struggles of this world.
Amen. Well, thank you, Brother Chaz.
Thank you,
that was
bro.
An amazing session that we had here today, and really grateful to hear it. If you get a chance to listen to this whole thing, please do. You're going to be blessed. Stay tuned. We're dropping episodes every single Monday. And of course, today I was hosting, but usually Chaz is doing it.
Phenomenal job.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely, bro. You're the man, bro.
I'm trying, bro. But anyway, I wanted to thank you all for tuning in. If you're looking for a church in Phoenix, Pop Church is the church to be at. This is where things are popping.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna have my little phrases here.
But
thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely.
God bless you.